Good evening and welcome to episode 7 of Norris Lee TV. Coming up in tonight's episode, Adam Taub conducts interviews about Israel's proposed annexation of the West Bank. I meet Rabbi Liss, the chair of the Rabbinical Council of the United Synagogue, about the reopening of our shuls, and we meet family Michaelson.
Very exciting stuff. On Thursday, a number of community leaders wrote to Israel's ambassador to the UK, Mark Regev, opposing the annexation of the West Bank. Today, Norris Lee TV enters the conversation. Our first interview is with Sir Mick Davis, former JLC chair and Conservative Party CEO. Over to you, Rabbi Friedman and Adam Taub.
So Mick Davis and Adam Taub, thank you so much for joining us today on Norris Lee TV. It's an honor to have you on here. And this is an important issue that is being discussed in the community and has been brought to the forefront of the community, not so much by our community in terms of its own conversations, but really by the actions of the government of Israel recently. And so today we're here to discuss the annexation issue, and I hand it over to Adam to begin the conversation.
Mick, thanks very much for joining us. Let's just get straight into the letter that you and about 40 or so other members of the Anglo-Jewish community have written to Mark Regev ahead of the potential annexation or extension of sovereignty. Can you explain why you feel this was such an urgent issue that even ahead of any actions by the State of Israel, you felt that you had to write this letter?
Well, I think that if you wanted to address the issue post facto, well, then it's too late. I mean, then you have a situation where events have taken place, facts are on the ground, and it's very difficult to change the consequences which flow from those facts being on the ground. So the judgment call was, is this a big enough issue for us to do something which is actually really quite extraordinary, almost unprecedented, certainly from the United Kingdom, to make such an intervention? And I guess the call that I made and the people who signed the letter, and many who didn't sign the letter, but who shared our views, was that this is not just something which is incremental in the ongoing saga between the State of Israel and the aspirations of the Palestinians to have their own state and the issues of security for Israel in the region. Not just an incremental move. This is a step change where we no longer deal with the problems of negotiating an effective two-state solution, but we actually move beyond that, and we simply take land which in the scheme of things was an issue before, which should be settled through the negotiation of the two states.
So sorry, Mick, because let me come straight to that, because obviously this is taking place in the context of the Trump administration and the Trump plan.
Yeah.
And the Trump plan is quite clear, and it says that annexation may take place, but only as part of a comprehensive negotiation. So one of the requirements is that there should be a cessation of building in the West Bank for 4 years. There must be negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. There will be a Palestinian state alongside Israel. So this is not just simply a single action, although obviously Netanyahu may be trying to divorce it from that. But nevertheless, the Trump plan itself envisages some form of solution with the Palestinians, which has not been progressing for a long time.
Well, we can agree with that, and without debating the merits of the Trump plan, you're absolutely right. In fact, the Trump plan envisioned a series of things happening, one of which could be annexation of certain parts of the territory which currently comprises the West Bank. And in fact, all peace plans that have been put on the table have envisaged an element of the West Bank being annexed in some form or another by Israel, but as part of a solution giving rise to a Palestinian state. What is happening here, the direction of travel, what is happening here is not the implementation of the Trump plan, but a decision by the Netanyahu administration to progress with annexation irrespective of the other elements of the Trump peace plan. So even if one likes the Trump peace plan as a basis of negotiating. And I think that's when it was positioned, it was designed to encourage the parties to come together. An element of that has been taken out and is being put down for implementation, initiated from July in terms of the agreement between the two major parties that make up the government of Israel. And that is a significant issue because it is a unilateral action, which in our view enhances neither the security of Israel, but destabilizes the Palestinian administration and creates a potential series of events which will be potentially to the detriment of all of us.
Let me take that issue about, that it's detrimental to the security of Israel and also to the Palestinians. So when you step back a bit and you look at the history of Israel, you see that this is not necessarily something that is unique. When you go back in time, you'll see that Israel has previously annexed the Golan Heights. Then it has also annexed East Jerusalem. And these are not presumably areas of land that you would be arguing that should be returned necessarily, maybe as part of a comprehensive peace deal, but these are areas that we're comfortable with. On top of it, Israel has taken unilateral action in 2005 when it pulled out of Gaza, doing the exact opposite of what it had done previously. So to see this action as completely unique is not necessarily accurate. And the land that we're talking about, as you mentioned earlier, may well fall under areas that would be negotiated under an agreement in the first place. So Israel's argument may well be, you know what, in the light of the fact that we have no solution, no advance, why don't we try and shape a policy or a future Middle East that is what we think would be a fair result?
Okay, well, I think you're right. Israel has taken unilateral actions, and some of those unilateral actions I've supported. I think the annexation of the Golan Heights, I was sort of right behind it. Never thought we should ever give it back. But the position between us and the Syrians is entirely different between us and the Palestinians. So what we have here is a dual claim on the land. We have a claim on the land, and we take it from our religious and historical perspectives, our Zionist perspectives, our emotional perspectives, but we have Palestinians who've lived in that land for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they have, for them, an equally strong claim. So the question that I always have to settle in my own mind is, how much do I want to press the claim on the land versus trying to achieve what I will think, in my judgment, will be a sustainable and enduring peaceful environment. And I'm happy to sacrifice a claim on a portion of the land to do that. Now, in essence, we're actually asking the Palestinians to do the same thing as well in these negotiations. We're asking them to actually give up their claim on what we now call the major blocks for the sake of a secure, enduring solution. And so I think there's a symmetry on both sides when one looks at the whole question of land. But this is different. This is envisaging the annexation of a portion of the West Bank, which we never envisaged annexing before, and a quantum of the West Bank, which will give rise to any Palestinian state, in inverted commas, which is hopelessly fragmented. And I think that in fact undermines this whole question of enduring and peaceful environment.
Understood.
And that's where I guess I come from in the context of the practicality of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Can I just ask you this question? In the letter you write, it's incompatible with the notion of Israel as both a Jewish and a democratic state. Now, I understand your objection in terms of we're trying to reach an agreement. I understand it potentially even as a moral question as to whether we have the right to do it. But the issue about whether this is the action of a democratic state, I have more of a challenge with. Because we are looking at a government which is actually the biggest government Israel has ever had. Two parties have come together to agree. They have all, prior to actually forming the government, agreed that they want to go ahead with annexation. They also have all of the parties on the right who are not part of the agreement, who obviously are in favor of annexation and don't feel that it goes far enough. What makes you feel that this is not a democratic action?
So I was looking for democratic state post facto, not leading up to the decision. I mean, I think it is moot as to whether those people who voted for blue and white had in their minds that they'd be supporting a government, being part of a government which actually progressed the concept of annexation. I think that's moot. But I was looking at it from a different perspective. And the perspective is this: if we annex the land, what happens to the people on the land that we annex? Now, I think we've already got a clue from Prime Minister Netanyahu when he said annexation of Area C would not in fact give rights of citizenship to the Palestinians living in Area C. So how do they exercise their political rights? Do we force them to leave, or what do they do? And I think it's that challenge, and it's in fact the enduring challenge if we don't achieve a solution where we fundamentally separate ourselves politically from the Palestinians. This is the enduring problem that we have, is how do we have in our own minds an Israel going forward where a certain section of the community living in what then is going to be effectively Greater Israel, not having the same political rights as other people living in Israel. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge that I'm looking at. Not the legitimacy, the democratic legitimacy of the Netanyahu government to make the decision to annex. Although, as I said, I think we can debate whether a section of that government, the people who voted for the section of government, actually had that in mind when they cast their ballots.
Let me ask you then, let me just move on to, what do you think, if this does go ahead and there are an extension of sovereignty or annexation, however it's described, what do you think the ramifications will be for the state of Israel from a diplomatic, economic, global perspective?
Well, I mean, we're now speculating, of course, and whatever I say might not turn out to be the case. But I think undoubtedly there will be a very negative reaction from Europe and from this country, and it will be, I think, significant enough for all governments within Europe to think about how they respond and send a signal, however strong that is, to Israel that they do not support what they've done, and in fact they would not, they don't countenance it. So aside from the fact I don't think that they will recognize the annexation, I think they will respond both diplomatically and perhaps in other ways to send a very strong signal to Israel on that. And therefore I think that Israel's relationship with other democracies around the world will become strained, because there will be a point of difference, here, which I think is fundamental as opposed to tactical. The second thing is that I have a fear that it gives rise to renewed resurgence and legitimacy of the BDS movement. Now, I mean, growing up in South Africa, I know how effective a BDS movement can be when they have a righteous cause. And certainly I make no comparison between Israel in any state, in any phase of its manifestation of being anything like apartheid South Africa. That's not the point. The point is a BDS movement with a righteous cause is a formidable opponent. And I have a concern that they will then now have a righteous cause, and they will do everything they can to delegitimize Israel and move it into the pariah state status that is no longer an acceptable part of the community of nations. And that will have implications for Israel, maybe not directly economically, but certainly indirectly, and will have implications, I think, for young mobile people living in Israel as to where they choose and how they choose to live their lives. So I fear a significant discontinuity there. And my final point is that I think it is highly likely to give rise to the fragmentation and disintegration of the Palestinian Authority. Now, irrespective of what one thinks about the effectiveness of that authority and whether it is a corrupt, inefficient, or otherwise, it is a force for unity within Palestine and has been, in fact, a significant factor in ensuring that we haven't had significant unrest and violence within the territories. My concern is that we will now own that issue and own that problem. And I really don't want to see my nieces and nephews going into the West Bank to actually have to deal with managing the populations there which are in a state of flux and a state of unrest.
Yeah. I've got two last questions for you, Mick, because I know time is running out. The first is, what do you think it will do to the Anglo-Jewish community?
Well, the Anglo-Jewish community is a community which, as you know, spans many parts, and I think that there will be a section of the community which and the younger part of the community who will be affronted by this, and it will be a challenge to their values and a challenge to the way they connect with Israel. And I don't think that we should minimize that as a very big cause of concern. I have a great concern that younger people today have less connectivity to the concept of their Zionist identity connecting with their Jewish identity in the way that perhaps I do and certainly my parents did. I think there's a concern. It will certainly create, I think, tensions within the community, within the center ground of the community, of people who are lovers and supporters of Israel, but who don't deal very well with the concept of hugging and struggling with Israel at the same time. Now, I can deal with that. I mean, I hug Israel, and I've stood out in its defense, and I've written as strongly defending the Netanyahu government in the secular media as I have in criticizing it, and when I believe they've warranted defense. But, so I can deal with the issue of hugging and struggling with Israel at the same time. But I fear there are a lot of people that in our community that will not be able to do that. And that cannot be good for the long-term health of Zionist identity here.
Last question for you. If it goes ahead and the Netanyahu government actually proceeds with annexation, will it change your personal relationship with Israel?
Now, you see, I'm a Zionist, and I love the land, and I love the country, and I love the people. My daughter lives there, my brothers live there, my late mother lived there, my mother-in-law lives there, I have homes there. It's the nation state of the Jewish people, it's my country. And that's why I feel that I'm entitled to voice the view in the same way I voice the view about politics in the United Kingdom, and I've written about it as well. I will do so about Israel because I believe that it's my country. And this will not change anything in relation to that.
Mick, as they say, you're all in on this one.
Thank you.
Great to speak to you. I wish you
Thanks
Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick. Thank you, Adam.
Thank
this
you.
has been a fabulous, candid, excellent discussion. And may we always be honest with one another and able to have these discussions, conversations in such a way that we can feel tolerant, respectful, and open-minded. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Great to meet you, Mick. Be well.
Bye. Ciao.
Well, thank you, Adam. And so Mick and Rabbi Friedman are very, very interesting indeed. Now, there are always two sides to the argument, aren't there?
Absolutely. Our next interview is with Natasha Hausdorff of UK Lawyers for Israel, who will share with us the legal basis for Israel's proposed move. Over to you, Adam.
So Natasha, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Let me just give a brief introduction to you, because I'm sure you would be too modest to mention some of your achievements. You're a barrister at Six Pump Court. You're the director of the NGO UK Lawyers for Israel. You previously clerked for the president of the Israeli Supreme Court in Jerusalem. You got a law degree from Oxford, qualified as solicitor as American commercial law firm, and you're particularly focused on international law. So you really are absolutely ideally placed to discuss the issues that I want to raise with you today. As you know, to put the context, a letter has been made public by about 40 members of the Anglo-Jewish community. And it's directed towards Mark Regev to be passed on to the Israeli administration, saying that they are extremely concerned about the potential annexation of territory in the West Bank. And if I just quote for you here, it says, "In our view, it would be a Pyrrhic victory, intensifying Israel's political, diplomatic, and economic challenges without yielding any tangible benefit." So this is the concern that they have. And what I would also make clear is that the individuals who signed this letter are not individuals who have been traditionally aggressive or oppositional towards Israel, quite the opposite. These are passionate supporters of Israel, Zionists, and people who have defended Israel for many years who feel that they've had to speak out. So what I'd love to do is if you would just simply lay out for us the legal issues that we are facing at the moment, because they're referred to in many different ways, and it will be extremely helpful if you just give us your insight.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's very good to be with you and to take the opportunity to address the misrepresentations of international law against Israel and to get to grips with these allegations that Israel violates international law, which really seem to have taken hold in the community, or that the proposals with respect to Area C in the West Bank, which are currently being discussed, would be contrary to international law. That is a key starting point before we can perhaps address the political questions surrounding the proposals and whether they are a good idea or not. Now, when we look at the question of international law, we need to ask ourselves, what is the status of the territory in Area C of the West Bank? There is a fundamental international law principle that establishes borders of newly emerging states at independence, as in the case of Israel in 1948. It is universally applied. It applied in the 19th century. In the case of South America, it was later applied in Asia and in Africa, and still later it was applied at the disintegration of the former communist federations. It's been applied in all of these cases to states emerging. It was applied to states also emerging from former mandates. In the case of the mandate for Mesopotamia, when it became the Kingdom of Iraq, in the case of the mandates for Syria and Lebanon. So really, in all cases where mandates were established and that states were emerging, they emerged from these administrative units and followed this principle. Now, the universal rule for determining the borders of newly emerging states at the moment of independence dictates that the new state takes on the boundaries of the pre-existing administrative unit as its international borders. The rule is called uti possidetis juris. Please look it up, Google it, see for yourself what it dictates and how it is universally applied. It's the default. So anywhere there is no agreement to the contrary, the rule is universally applied as a matter of customary international law. To provide certainty, to avoid frontiers being disputed, to avoid wars breaking out, and to promote peace and stability. Those were the reasons that the International Court of Justice recognized as being fundamental to the development of the principle. Now, another fundamental principle of public international law is its equal application. You can't have a general rule and an exception for a country that you don't like very much, or that you have political or ideological opposition to. That is not how any respectable legal system can operate. So the question is, what does this principle, universally applied, tell us about the legal status of the territory in Israel's case? Well, in 1948, Israel was the only state to emerge from the pre-existing British mandate. The administrative lines on the eastern side of the British mandate ran along the Jordan River all the way to the south, originally dividing it from the administrative unit of Transjordan, which later became the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And by the way, Jordan's borders also follow the principle of uti possidetis juris. Israel is the only state to emerge from the mandate territory in 1948. Automatically assumes is, as its internationally recognized borders, the administrative lines of the mandate, and that therefore includes East Jerusalem and the West Bank that was occupied by Jordan in 1948 in Israel's War of Independence, but then also recovered by Israel in 1967. The legal status of that territory is that Israel has been sovereign since 1948. There has been no agreement of any kind on the transfer of sovereignty since 1948. Now, the legal status is important because it tells us that Israel's presence in the territory is entirely lawful. But this also brings me to the use of terminology here, and in particular the term annexation, to describe Israel's proposal of the application of civilian law in parts of Area C. The term is wholly inappropriate, not just because Israel is the underlying sovereign, but also because it is a misrepresentation of what is being proposed. Now, I'll just give you a definition of annexation from the Oxford Encyclopedia of Public International Law. Annexation means the forcible acquisition of territory by one state at the expense of another state. Opponents
So
of
Natasha, can I just ask you,
Sure.
in relation to the two territories that have obviously been annexed in the past by Israel, which would be the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem, would you apply the term annexation to the Golan or East Jerusalem, or would you distinguish between the two, therefore?
So when we're talking about the Golan Heights, because that is territory that did not form part of the British Mandate, that was actually seized from from Syria in armed conflict, that is an entirely different situation, an entirely different legal analysis to which the term annexation may in fact be applied. But with respect to East Jerusalem, we're talking about the same
same concept
of the territory.
I just wanted to clarify it in my mind. Thank you.
And in fact, on Jerusalem, when Israel applied its civilian law in full in 1967, Abba Eban, who was foreign minister at the time, was explicit when he wrote to the UN Secretary General to clarify the misinformation about what this step was. And he was very clear that Israel's application of its civilian law in full to East Jerusalem did not constitute annexation. The same, of course, because of the underlying nature and the status of the territory here. And I would say that opponents of Israel that are using the term annexation make a series of false assumptions on the basis of this definition of what the term means in public international law. They assume Israel lacks a sovereign claim to the territory. They assume that another state actually holds sovereign title to the territory. And they assume that when Israel applies its laws, it will be taking some other state's territory. It's unfortunate, really unfortunate that the terminology of annexation is being wrongly deployed here. It's a prime example, I believe, of where the rhetoric of international law conflicts with the reality of international law, and where a rule is made up in distortion of international law against Israel. And that is why you don't see such rules being deployed elsewhere and in other contexts.
Let's return to the issue of applying civil Israeli law to parts of the West Bank, which is, I believe, is how you're defining it now.
Correct.
What is the significance of that, and why is it legal?
Well, the legal question is, of course, separate from the political question of how Israel has decided to administer that territory for the last 53 years. The legal basis of it really rests in the fact that as sovereign, Israel is entitled to administer that territory in the way that it sees fit.
And that would apply to the whole of the West Bank, areas A, B, and C.
It would, but of course, one must bear in mind that there are political decisions that Israel has been making over the years.
We're talking about the legal issues, then we'll come on to the political.
Of course.
What are the ramifications for the Palestinians who are in Area C that may fall under Israeli civilian administration as a result of this change?
So let me first explain what exactly the change might involve. The administrative regime that Israel established in 1967 in the West Bank was intended to be temporary because it was anticipated, it was hoped by Israel that a negotiated peace agreement at the time with Jordan could be swiftly achieved, which would bring about an end to that temporary administration. And which might, of course, involve a change to sovereignty or borders, which arises out of a negotiated settlement. 53 years later, I think it is entirely unreasonable to expect Israel to maintain a situation of limbo, a situation where Knesset legislation does not properly apply to these areas, where there is therefore a devastatingly confusing patchwork of legal administration. So where you have a leftover Jordanian law, Ottoman law, British Mandate law, and utter confusion over how these regulate 21st century issues, where there is a total absence of environmental regulation and legislation, and the sorts of provisions which benefit the rest of the country, where civilian law is applied in full.
Let me just come to the status of the Palestinians in those areas. Will they be offered citizenship? Will they have a right to vote in Israeli elections? Will they have integrity of their property in those areas?
The answer to all of those questions, of course, depends on the specific proposals that are put forward. We don't know what those are yet. The idea is that discussion about this will start from next month. But what we do know is that, in general, the principle, the proposal of applying Israeli civilian law to areas brings with it significant benefits to the local population, and that is both Jewish and Arab. So there is another total inversion of the truth, I believe, that ordinary Palestinian Arabs who might be impacted by these proposals will necessarily oppose them, because depending on what proposal is finally implemented, residents of the area stand to gain substantively, and that is in terms of access to healthcare, access to the welfare system, access to social security benefits, the right to vote in municipal elections, and other rights that attach to residency, including the possibility of acquiring citizenship, and therefore all of the rights and benefits that attach to being a citizen of the only democracy in the Middle East. And that's why, in fact, just to put this into context, that we actually saw Palestinian Arabs voting with their feet and moving into areas that were slated for Israeli.
Now we're going into political territory. I wanted to deal with the legal side first, then I promise you we'll come on to the politics. Now, I understand the position as you put it. The general position, as I understand it in the international community, is that the Fourth Geneva Convention applies to the West Bank. And that means that it is effectively occupied territory that Israel would administer under the Fourth Geneva Convention. Israel's position, from what I understand, is that the Fourth Geneva Convention does not apply to the West Bank. However, de facto, Israel has applied the Fourth Geneva Convention under its own discretion. Now, would this move by Israel mean that it is changing that position?
Well, the position that Israel has taken is, so far as the temporary administration of the West Bank is concerned, it applies the framework of the law of occupation, which is what you find under the Fourth Geneva Convention, to assist its administration of the territory. Absolutely, this would be a change to the internal administration of that territory, and to move away from the kind of divisions that you have between populations, where you have the application of military law as the framework of the Fourth Geneva Convention rules mandate, and you have a greater equality, if you will, between citizens and non-citizens, in that they are afforded residency and have the benefits that are afforded to Israeli residents across the country. That is, of course, the model that was applied in East Jerusalem. It's the model that was mooted with respect to suburbs of Jerusalem, which is where you saw Palestinian Arabs moving into those areas, preempting the application of the full application of Israeli civilian administration there, in order to benefit from those same provisions.
Okay. Let me come on to the next question. Okay, so we've talked about the legal side. Let's talk about the question of the long-term solution with the Palestinians. Can I ask you, are you in favor of a two-state solution as a sort of a final way of resolving the dispute, or do you think a two-state solution is no longer viable?
Well, I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. So the practical aspects of it are, of course, incredibly challenging. In principle, it would, of course, be a wonderful solution to such a protracted conflict. I think, actually, in terms of the practical implications of the proposal, none of this prejudices what a final settlement would look like. Any proposals around a two-state solution have envisaged Israeli sovereign territory being transferred via land swaps, and most recently, of course, the Trump plan sees chunks of the Negev, undisputed Israeli sovereign territory, being transferred in that fashion. So in that sense, it doesn't affect the situation at all, and Israel is able to negotiate over the territory to which its law applies as it has done in the past. But I would say, to the extent that it moves us away from previous mistakes with respect to negotiations, to the extent that it encourages it encourages the Palestinian leadership to come to the negotiation table, so discourages Palestinian intransigence. So if the PA think of this as a defeat, perhaps in PR terms, then to the extent that that might encourage them to drop their no negotiation stance, that is a very good thing. Only time will tell.
Natasha, why do you think this would be a defeat in PR terms? One of the things that the Palestinians, they seem to have lost every physical battle, but they seem to have been very successful in PR battles. And we're looking now at the European Union exercising sanctions country by country against Israel if it implements this. The UK itself is talking about measures that it wants to take against the state of Israel. The International Criminal Court is looking at measures that it might take against individual Israelis, and this might help it. I'm sure that the UN will have plenty of votes against Israel when this takes place, and the Trump administration may protect it against the Security Council resolutions, but there will be plenty in the General Assembly. Why do you think that this move might be conducive to bringing a two-state solution closer?
Well, let's take that in parts. To the extent that it prompts, to the extent that any change from the previous intransigence might prompt future negotiations, I think that would be a positive. In terms of the reaction of the international community, I feel that we have been through the story multiple times over. We had the same warnings being raised with respect to the move of the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and American recognition of Jerusalem as its capital. We had the same warnings being issued at the Americans' recognition of Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights. And now again, the same threats Abu Mazen has made multiple times before about tearing up security cooperation agreements between Israel and the Palestinian Authority are being issued. I think we need to be careful about how seriously we take what seem to be empty threats that have been made multiple times over in the past and not acted upon, including, of course, the many times Abu Mazen has threatened to resign and disband the Palestinian Authority. There is, of course, a degree to which rhetoric can be harmful, and that is why opportunities like this to set the record straight, to push back on the misrepresentations are so fundamentally important. It is very troubling indeed that international governments...
I'm conscious of the time, so I'm just going to cut in if it's okay. What I wanted to ask you is about Israel's alliance with the Trump administration. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's position prior to Benjamin Netanyahu was always to be very, very careful in its relations with the state of America, the United States. Since Benjamin Netanyahu has come in, he has been much more partisan in the way that he has approached American politics. He's spoken in Congress and criticized Obama. He has been seen to be extremely close to Donald Trump. And I wonder if this is good for Israel in the longer term. When the Democrats eventually win, and it may well be very soon that they actually win, but Biden is already talking about, talking in terms of very critical of Israel, picking up that baton. And there is a danger that maybe Israel has simply taken the opportunities that Trump has given it, but as a result, it will pay the price when the Trump administration comes to a close. What do you think?
So I think it's important to remember that the proposals around the application of Israeli civilian law predate Trump. The fact that under the support of the current American administration in this political context, these ideas are gaining significant traction is of course notable, but the suggestion which seems to lie behind your question, that for some reason when there is a Republican administration, Israel should make sure that it keeps in line with Democrat foreign policy, and when there is a Democrat administration, of course, Israel keeps in line with Democratic foreign policy, does seem an odd approach to be taking, especially to what is widely considered to be Israel's chief and most important ally. I think the fact that the American administration is currently taking a very different line on what potential future negotiations might look like is an important step away from the encouragement that the international community has previously given to Palestinian intransigence. So what we have seen is that each time negotiations break down, Israel is expected to better the offer on the table for the next round, and that of course can only encourage future breakdown of negotiations where the Palestinians think that the next offer will be better still. So taking a step back, recognizing fundamental truths that these proposals relate to areas which were always going to be the subject of land swaps and would most likely have remained within Israeli territory after any negotiated solution. Avoiding the intransigence, the temporary limbo-like nature of the current situation, and moving forward in a positive fashion that will benefit both Israelis and Palestinians is something which, a fresh look at this might be certainly encouraging. But there are those in Israel who've been calling for it for quite
No, I accept that. Natasha, one last question. This has arisen to some degree. I recognize that discussion took place beforehand, but it was part of the Trump peace plan. The Trump peace plan doesn't just allow Israel to annex, it calls for certain other things as well. It calls for negotiations with the Palestinians, it calls for an end to building in the territories for at least a period of 4 years. Do you think that if Israel is going to take these steps of extending civilian law to the territories, it should do it as part of the Trump peace plan and make sure that it stops building and that it conducts negotiations with the Palestinians?
So, of course, it's important to remember that the peace plan proposals are a proposed framework for negotiation, and it has long been accepted by the Israeli government that only a bilateral negotiated solution can afford any sort of improvement long-term to the solution, and that relies, of course, on Palestinian leadership coming to the table. It's most unfortunate that the decision has been taken not to do so, and in fact in breach of the Oslo Accords to pursue the sort of war that you described previously with respect to PR and international organizations and the International Criminal Court, rather than looking to a proper solution. Now, there are all sorts of reasons that one can analyze for that. Whether or not Mahmoud Abbas actually has an incentive to seek a peaceful solution is key to that, when one considers that he is able to hold on to political power as a result of the perpetuation of the conflict, international donations flood in as a result of the perpetuation of the conflict, and of course, very importantly in the current discussion, he relies on Israeli security cooperation to prevent a Hamas takeover of the West Bank in the same way that they took over the Gaza Strip. So I think there are big questions here as to whether the Palestinian leadership's interests properly coincide with the interests of the Palestinian people.
I understand that, but the question that I asked you was, should we stop building for 4 years as part of it to say we are trying to implement the Trump peace plan? I'm interested in your view on that.
Well, that is very much a matter for, again, the Israeli government to decide in the context of...
I'm interested in your view, Natasha.
Well, in my view, any action, the issue I have is that opposition to building in the West Bank strikes me as tantamount to the position that Jews are not allowed to live in certain areas simply because they are Jews. So the problem I have really is with the basis of the question. It's not a question as to whether Israel ought to continue building in the West Bank. It's a question as to what on earth is the legal basis to prevent it from doing so in the first place. Now, of course, there are political considerations that influence Israel's decision to do so, and for a long time that has been to halt that building in the hope that there might be potential to negotiate with the Palestinians. But Israel has been met with flat rejection. So the notion that it should unilaterally be taking measures to prevent economic development in the region, and in particular in the West Bank, is troubling to me.
Natasha, thank you so much for your time. We went on a little bit longer than I expected, but it was genuinely fascinating, and I really appreciate the time you've given us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam and Natasha, for explaining the legal position to us. Now, some of us, I'm sure, are quite keen, quite eager to get back to Shul and have some kind of normalcy, but we know that is not going to be quite normal. We're not going to have this grand, welcome back to normal straight away. a phased transition. And I would like to invite now the chair of the Rabbinical Council, Rabbi Liss, who is known to many in our shul, where we discuss this. So let's bring on Rabbi Liss. Well, Rabbi Liss, thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome to Norris Lee TV. I know you are no stranger to Norris Lee. We're missing you, seeing you at the morning minyan and Shabbos Mincha. You always walk over. But first of all, I want to start by saying a big yesher koach to you as the chair of the Rabbinical Council. I know you've been working really, really hard with Rabbonim, with the based in Chief Rabbi, and with communities besides your own as well. So big yesher koach to you. You've had your hands full. And I just want to ask you how you are finding things yourself.
Thank you, and good evening, Rabbi Guten Tag. You mentioned that I am, in normal times, a regular at Norris Lee, and I'm really missing the morning minyan on the mornings that Highgate doesn't have a minyan. I'm missing Shabbos Mincha, and I want to say hello to everyone from the community. Really missing your warmth and friendship and humour in the mornings. Also, while saying hello to the community, I want to wish a special mazel tov to my Auntie Rochelle and Uncle Anthony Selby on their golden wedding anniversary. So
yeah, mazel tov.
Massive mazel tov. And it's lovely in these times to celebrate Simchas. So another 50 years, Mi'etz Hashem, in good health, and everybody else in the community should likewise be blessed.
Amen.
So besides for missing you guys, the last few months have been, and sorry for the cliche, absolutely extraordinary. I don't think, I can imagine putting this on my shidduch resume, I don't think I've davened in a minyan since Shushan Purim. That's since about the 10th of March, because I was ill at the time, just after Purim, and then there was lockdown. But at the time, I had the privilege to be part of the United Synagogue's Cobra team. Now, I know that the word Cobra stands for Cabinet Office Briefing Room A, but we've so named the team at the United Synagogue, which is full of the directors of the US, together with a couple of Rabbonim, and you know, from the decisions that we passed up to the Chief Rabbi and the Beis Din to close the shuls, the shilas, the questions that we had around what to do with cemeteries, and to make sure that we enable people to go to the funerals for the levayas of their nearest and dearest, to the care packages that the US sent out. Every community has been astonishing in the way that it's looked after their own, and the US centrally has provided firstly Seder in a box and then care packages. Really an amazing feat, and it's extraordinary to be appearing on Norris Lee TV. The change, the transformation from...
This is a proper TV station, I'll have you know.
No, we're completely bowled over, but the turnaround from our physical presence to an online service with everything that you're doing, whether it's the Friday night services, whether it's the Rabbi and Rabbi Nick giving lessons online, whether it's you giving stuff online, and the community activities, and many other communities doing well, really, really astonishing. But it shows how much we care for our members, that the US does, and the honorary officers. And you know, now that we're starting, Baruch Hashem, to think about the return, the question is going to be how we get the balance between the return to shul. Not everyone's going to come back immediately, and that's fine, and that's understandable. So we're going to have to cater for a broader range than before.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. So the government have given a date of 4th of July, which has already been made public, and it's been circulated with our shul as well. What do you think that will look like? I know 4th of July is actually on a Shabbos. I don't think we're planning anything on the Shabbos date, so we're going to begin, I believe, on the Sunday, the 5th. How would you like that to look in United Synagogue shuls, and more specifically Norris Lee?
Right, so what we understand at this stage is that what the government have said is that when it comes to phase 3, that's when places of worship can open, and they're saying the earliest date for phase 3 is the 4th of July. So must be caveated when we talk about the 4th of July, that's the earliest date. Please God, that should be the date we come back. And you know, reflecting with all the various midrashim and Torah sources about how much, how blessed HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels, and what he tells, Hashem tells his malachim, his serving angels, of how much he enjoys when we have services in shuls, and what that must mean that we haven't got them, and the pain that's there, the pain that we are feeling every day, balancing, of course, that we have to do it in a safe way, because we've seen from across the world that Shul close services and people being close together in rooms have been causes of spreading of the virus, and that's something we want to avoid at all costs. And so the government are talking about phase 3, they're talking about 4th of July being Lord's Day, and just over this weekend they've announced that places of worship can be opened for private prayer. Now, we don't do we do private prayer, to make it clear. We do private prayer, but that's not what we come to Shul for. So we consider this a step in the right direction. And then, please God, when we open, we've got to think about all the restrictions that are going to be there, hopefully, in the short term. You've got the social distancing, which is currently down at 2 meters. And you think of the size of your shul, and then we start to calculate how many people can you actually fit in if everybody has to have a circle with a radius of 2 meters around.
Yeah, in all directions, isn't it? So yeah,
it's a circle. So the government are considering lowering that to 1.5 meters or 1 meter. We'll have to wait and see. We're being guided by them. We're also being told that there's going to be no singing in Shul. Can you imagine a service without singing?
The Chazan can sing, surely.
The Chazan can sing. So the Chazan can sing, and Baruch Hashem, you're blessed with a Chazan with a beautiful voice.
We are.
A beautiful neshama as well. And so he can sing, and hopefully after not too long we'll be able to as well. And it could be, again, it's a month till the 4th of July. We'll have to see if those restrictions are placed.
We've already got a planning committee here headed by our warden, David Galorn, and so there's regular meetings about that. I do feel a bit sad that it's not going to look normal, and it's not going to be like, oh, welcome back to normal. It's going to be such a phased situation. So, we'll have to wear face masks as well.
Again, that's our understanding. That's the current guidance that we're being informed. So that's what we'll do if that's what we're supposed to. It's
no kiddish. I mean,
if you think back, Rabbi Goodenso, if you think back a month where we were a month ago, and now you flip that and think where things are going to be in a month, if things progress in the right direction,
it takes time.
It could be very different, but we need to plan for all eventualities. Also, we have to caveat everything. If chas v'sholom, if God forbid there is a second wave, then we might have to hit the big red button and say, actually, shuls are closed.
Yeah, we would have to be.
And
we'd have to be ready to do an immediate shutdown, chas v'sholom, if that's necessary. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I think most shuls, your shul in Highgate as well, we're thinking of, if 4th is that big day, we'll start on the 5th. We'll start on the 5th with some weekday services to get things into motion, so that by the time it comes to Shabbos, and please God, everyone listens to this will be desperate to get back to shul that week, and so you may have a problem with having to do 2 or 3 services. But Shabbos naturally is going to be a bigger draw, and so we have to think about that as well. But let me tell you one thing: July the 4th, everywhere around the world is laning Parshas Balak. Here in the UK, we'll be laning Chukas Balak.
Yeah.
In Eretz Yisrael, where they're a week ahead, they'll be laying Balak. In that Sedra, we have the bracha of Matova Ohalecha Yaakov. How goodly are thy tents, O Jacob. What an amazing week to be thinking about coming back.
Very good. Very good. I love that. I love when that happens. You find something in the parasha which is relevant. So that's what we try and do.
It wasn't my thoughts. I heard it. Mikey Woolick told it to me the other day.
That's very good. There's always something in the parasha, which is what I guess as a rabbi you also try to do in your droshes and your sermons, to pick something from that week, which is talking to us today. So that's always nice when that happens. What about children? So I believe what I've read from the Chief Rabbi's guidance that they don't want under 12. And I get why, because you don't know where they've been and you can't really control them where they go, as everyone's have kids at home. Thinking ahead, Rosh Hashanah for children, would we be able to provide children's services over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or at least off-site perhaps? Or is it too early to tell? What do you think?
One thing I say besides for that kids, one of the things we want to do is, we've missed so many months of shul. People have missed the opportunity to say Kaddish, to say answer to Kedusha, to be there for services. We want to enable as many people to do that as possible. So if you have a limited number of people who can come to shul, we want to have people who are over bar and bar mitzvah to start with. You've also got the element of what you said about kids. That didn't come out of my mouth.
Yeah, I'll say it.
But we're talking 3 months Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur are in 3.5 months. Rosh Hashanah's in 3.5 months' time. A lot can change.
Sure.
At this stage, we're being guided that it's going to be difficult with kids, but let's be creative. Your shul are very creative on a lot of things. Let's get our thinking caps together to see how we can serve the kids of our community. We also have to think about those adult members of our community who are either not ready to come back or not able to come back. We need to reach out to them as well to make sure they feel included and that they are part of the Yom HaNoraim as well. Really, really important
Sure.
to include everybody.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Another question I want to ask you is that the government are allowing gatherings of 6 outdoors, like in your back garden, including yourself. So I can invite 5 people around to my back garden.
As long as it's socially distanced.
Yeah, we're socially distanced and we're not going to be sharing food. And my next door neighbour, whose garden we can actually see, can also have 6. So that would be a perfectly halachic minyan, but United Synagogue are discouraging that. Why?
Okay, that's a really important and challenging. But first, I would challenge you on whether it's a completely halachic minyan. After all, if there's a fence in the middle, traditionally we know that for a minyan to take place, you need 10 people.
But we've got a gap. There's a gap. There's a gap. We can make it.
Okay.
We can all see.
But even if there isn't a gap,
yeah.
there are those who say the Mishnah Berurah says that in extremis, and I don't think it's difficult to suggest that we are in a position of an extremis. You can run the pin as long as everybody can see each other.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's a tall fence. Everyone would need to stand on chairs to see each other. But the position of the US up to and including last week, before this new rule of 6 people came into place, is that garden minyanim shouldn't take place. It's difficult to control them, and at that point, it was definitely against the law. We've subtly tried to ascertain and seek guidance on this, and it seems that we're not quite there yet on them being allowed. We're not going to say anything about if there are services taking place. We're not noticing them. But for us to actually formally take part in a service is difficult at this moment because it's not clear that they're permitted. The reason being, whereas you can have a family can have a barbecue in one garden and a family can have a barbecue in another garden, that's allowed. But if they're timing it together, so they're having a barbecue at the same time. If it's one barbecue at the same time, the question is that one gathering? And that's what the government are trying to avoid. Again, for our safety. So
yeah, but the government have allowed it. I believe it was United Synagogue. For example, if someone's got a shiva and they want to say Kaddish, so they can have 6 in their back garden, as can their next door neighbours have 6. Again, in a way where it is halachically permissible, where they can see each other, no problem. The United Synagogue have advised us that we should not be encouraging such minyanim. And if they do it, they do it. Of course, we turn a blind eye and good luck to them. But they don't want United Synagogue to promote that or to have the clergy involved. And I'm just wondering why that is the case, if you don't mind me asking.
So if I can take issue with one thing, when you say the government have allowed it, I don't think they have. And that's
they said up to 6 people. Up to 6 people.
Up to 6 people in one garden. But if you're getting 2 gardens together of up to 6 in both, that's considered one gathering, and their maximum number is 6. After all, you're telling me that the 2 gatherings together, you've got a minyan, which means you're suggesting that it is a gathering of over 6. It's a gathering of 10.
So it's just a precaution to be overly careful.
We want to be careful, and also things like this can go out of control as well. So at the moment, this is the advice we're getting, and please God, that will change. We're hoping, listening out. I saw on the news over the weekend that in Northern Ireland, they're now allowing weddings to take place outdoors for up to 10 people. As soon as they announced that in the UK, in England, that will mean we can have outdoor minyanim according to everybody, and that will we will grab at that opportunity.
Any idea when that might happen? Because we do have a few chuppahs planned, well, waiting to be planned. Any idea when that might be able to take place?
No idea, although I did see that Robert Jenrick was thinking this is a good quiz question for everybody. There are 2 religions in this country who are allowed to officiate, have weddings outdoors. One is, well, obviously the Jewish religion, as we've all been to chuppahs outdoors, and the other are the Quakers. But Robert Jenrick was saying over the weekend that he wants to bring in special legislation to allow all religions to get married outdoors, because what we haven't spoken about is the fact that there is a qualitative difference about the transfer of the sharing of the virus between outdoors and indoors. So they are going to be more lenient on things outdoors, and hopefully sometime soon. We understood that it was going to be around Shavuos. It hasn't happened yet, but that outdoor weddings will be allowed with a limited number of attendees, socially distanced, but hopefully that will come soon, but that's not with any knowledge.
Excellent. Okay, well, Rabbi Liss, thank you very, very much for answering our questions. And again, thank you for all you've been doing. I know we've been seeing each other a lot over this, over Zoom. I look forward to seeing you in real life.
Likewise, yeah, it's been a great opportunity to spend weekly and sometimes fortnightly occasions with the rabbinate, sharing best practice ideas so that we can take them back to our own communities and thinking about what the future is going to look like for our communities. So,
and I appreciate it personally as well, because it makes us feel that we're not alone. We all have very similar, not all the same, but very similar challenges. We're all in it together, and we kind of help and support each other, which is invaluable. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here this evening. Good luck in your Shul. I look forward. If you want to come back to our weekday minyan, you might have to register in advance, but we should let you in.
We will certainly put our names down, but I would expect that priority would be given to members, but we'll be we'll be waiting in the wings for our opportunity.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Rabbi Liss.
Please send our love to your rabbi, your rabbinate, your chazan,
absolutely,
and to your honorary officers and everyone in the community. We're missing you all.
Thank you. All the best.
All the best. Colton.
Thank you, Rabbi Liss. That was quite informative. It's going to be, it's exciting to go back to Shul, but it looks like it's going to be quite different, Rabbi Gunther.
Yeah.
Quite a different service, smaller. Be interesting to see. But it's nice to be able to go back into the building.
Yep. And now we meet our very own family Michaelson. Now, Joe just celebrated his bar mitzvah 2 weeks ago on Zoom. So let's meet the family. Oh, family Michaelson, there you are.
Oh, hey.
Welcome to Norris TV.
Thank you.
You're live to the nation now. What a perfect setup you've got there. You look like you've done this before. So let's start with the oldest, Sam. Sam, how old are you?
14.
40. Oh, I was 14 when I was your age. So what are you doing these days since you've had no school? How are you keeping yourself busy?
Not really doing much. I've been having some film nights with Joe. We watched all of the Marvel movies in the course of like 2 weeks. Lots of barbecues as well.
Nice.
Yeah. You're doing online school.
I've actually had online classes though. Yeah.
Yeah, you conveniently missed that bit out, but that's obviously the most important, So what's your favourite barbecue recipes?
Mum cooks a very nice chicken thigh.
Nice.
10 out of 10.
Oh, very good. Are you the king of the grill, Sam?
No.
King of the grill.
Was that Dad? Darren, you're the king, aren't you?
Of the grill. I am queen of the grill.
Yeah.
The only woman in a Hampstead Garden suburb that does the barbecue.
Good to know.
Oh,
but Sam,
good.
you also had exams recently, no? Did you just did your exams online as well?
Yeah, which was a bit weird, but yeah.
How did you do?
I don't know. Cheers for that, Lily. I don't know. I'm getting my results back next week.
Are you confident?
I don't know what to expect.
I see your mum's got her fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I'm sure he did great.
Oh, really? From your mouth.
Amen. Oh, very good, Sam. Oh, thank you for speaking to us. Now, Joe, it wasn't so long, just a couple of weeks ago, on this very format on Zoom, we did your bar mitzvah. Now, what was it like on your end? How did you like it? Because you came across amazingly. Your parsha, your speaking, your dancing, your singing. You're obviously clearly very talented, but what was it like for you having your bar mitzvah in your own dining room in front of the screen rather than on the bimmer in Shul?
Well, obviously it would be better if I had it in Shul, but I think we made like a really good use of it, and we did it as good as we could. And I did find it really fun. I felt like I was being like watched, and I felt good because I didn't feel as if I was just doing it for no one. Like, because in Shul, the main reason I wanted to do it in Shul was because then everyone would see me doing it, and I wanted to impress people. And it was on Zoom with everyone, I felt I was doing that, and it was really
That's amazing. I tell you something, it certainly came across that you enjoyed it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You could tell. You're a good performer. I think it runs in the family, doesn't it?
He is a performer, that's for sure.
That segues right to Debbie, right?
Did you still get presents?
Yeah, I did. Because as I'm not having my party for like, I don't know.
We were actually overwhelmed with how kind everyone was. It was.
Oh, that's so nice to hear.
It was all about Joe and his bar mitzvah, but people were so lovely. They spoilt him.
It's so amazing. I tell you something. There were people on there who watched it, and that have come to us like, we want to do the same thing. So you're a role model. So thank you. I'm talking to all of you now, the whole family. You did it so well, and a lot of people have come forward who said, "Oh, we're not going to do anything. Wait till we can do it, Shul." And actually, we've seen the Michaelsons. We want to do it, and I've kept the recording. I've shown it around a bit.
Wow. Because you gave it detail. You decorated it with the balloon bar mitzvah boy, and it was like the real thing. It was really something special.
Because people sent us flowers. It was as if the simcha, it was happening.
It was the simcha. It was the simcha.
It was different, but it's something that he'll be able to, please God, tell his grandchildren. It was something very special.
Yeah, and you can show your grandchildren. Had it been in Shul, you wouldn't have had it on video. You can show, in 50 years' time, you'll have your little granddaughter on your knee, please God, and you say, "Look, don't know what you're going to call her, Lily, like your sister. This is my bar mitzvah 50 years ago on video," and you'll be very proud of it. Not many people will have that. I was bar mitzvah in 2020.
That's right.
That's something very special. So what else are you doing these days, keeping yourself out of trouble, or are you?
Now that your bar mitzvah's over.
Yeah, well, it's mostly the same as Sam. I'm watching a lot of TV these days, and we actually have sleepovers together sometimes. We just to keep us
What, in each other's rooms, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. Are you hospitable?
Very hospitable.
Oh, and midnight parties?
It's a MasterChef, Joe. He watches MasterChef a lot.
Oh, so useful TV. Very good.
Do you practice it at home though? Do you bring the practicalities to the kitchen?
No.
No. As long as it's going to help your parents, don't bother.
He enjoys the watching.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you, Joe. Now, Lily, you're sitting there very quiet. How old are you now?
I'm 11.
11. So, are you still having school on? So, what year would you be in school? Year 7?
I'm year 6.
Year 6. So, which school?
Channing.
Right. Oh, lovely. So you're probably not going back there, are you?
I went back on Tuesday.
Oh, you're back in school?
Yeah.
Year 6 went back to school this week. That's right. Tell us about that. How was that?
It was okay. It was different on the first day, but then I'm kind of like used to it now, and I really like it now. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
And it was nice seeing your friends.
Say that again.
Was it nice seeing your friends?
Yeah, it was really nice seeing everyone.
Explain about the building.
So there was in my whole year there are 2 classes, and in the whole year there are 48 children, but obviously they wanted to split it up so that there was not as many children in one classroom, so they split it up into 3, so 16 in each class, and so you're not so I've been with the same people for 7 years, so it was very different being with different people. So yeah, that's the only thing I needed to really get used to. But now
that's nice. And where are you going for high school next term?
I'm staying in Channing.
Oh, good.
Continuing on. Excellent.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
And you just recently you're part of a choir club?
Yes.
So and you auditioned for a part in ad? You want to tell us about that?
So I'm in this choir, and they give us lots of different opportunities, and one of them was to be in a TV advert, and Virgin Media wanted to film a lockdown, showing people what we're doing in lockdown. So my choir was asked to pick 30 to 40 children, and I was one of the people that were picked in my choir.
Nice.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
So now it's available on YouTube to see, right?
Yeah. Yes, it's on YouTube.
Excellent, excellent.
Oh, very good. So
You take
Debbie,
after your, yeah, you take after your mom, Debbie, right? Debbie, tell us a little about what you do.
Well, I'm a professional opera singer. Not doing much singing professionally at the moment. I was due to do a whole summer tour in Greece this year, but I think that's probably cancelled. They're still hoping I'm going to go, but
Oh, really?
yeah, because actually in Greece they've been very low with people being poorly. They've done very, very well.
Like 100 deaths, didn't they?
100 deaths. Yeah, they've done brilliantly in Greece. But there's still going to be 40% of people in the audience, and the audience have to wear masks. And anyway, I've told them I'll do it next summer. I'd rather do that and stay with the family.
Right.
good luck with that. Well, otherwise, how are you coping with everyone at home? And
I have to say, I've loved it. I mean, forgetting what's going on out there, which obviously we pray that everything will be okay.
sure.
I love being with the family. I've treasured it, actually. It's been something that I'll never get back again, I don't think.
That's amazing. That's good.
It's very special for me. I've loved it. We go for walks every morning, Darren and myself, with the dog. We eat together much more as a family. I'm cooking different things, although that's ending now. I'm sick of cooking. At the beginning, I was like making new things and all excited with it, but it's been lovely. As long as I can speak to my friends and know that they're okay in the family, we're okay. We're okay. I've realised we actually quite like each other.
That's great. I think, Joe, it's your turn now to start using what you're learning from Master Chef and bring it to the kitchen and give your mom a break.
I think that would be good.
I'm quite good.
What about Darren? Darren, do you get your hands dirty in the kitchen?
Sorry, Rabbi. Say that again. Sorry.
Do you roll your sleeves up in the kitchen?
I can do a very good breakfast. The kids will testify to that. They love burnt food. I can do that very well indeed. But no,
Only when I'm in the kitchen with you.
I've got I am the sous chef to Lily. So when Lily cooks, I am her assistant. That's my role. That's about the limit.
I actually prefer them not being in the kitchen. They make so much mess, I can't stand.
Oh, you're so normal. You're so normal. And how's it going with your work, Darren? Are you working from home?
Well, yes, I'm working from home, and you know it's all fine. I run a music rights fund, so dealing with intangible assets. So it doesn't really matter where I am. So
amazing.
Fingers crossed. All good. Yeah. Thank you. All good.
So do you think you're going to work from home going forward now that you don't?
I work a lot from home anyway, being honest with you. So, but yes, it's amazing how well we've all adapted, because the kids have all been at online school. Lily, as she said, has gone back this week, but we've all managed it really well. And we have, as we've discussed, we have the special bar mitzvah, which you guys were absolutely incredible. You know, you made it special for us as well. It was a real event.
It was amazing.
And we have that. So it's been a very special period, all in all. It really has.
That's amazing. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and being such a nice role model family for everyone in the community to see. You are live to the nation.
Thank you.
We wish you good luck. Thank you for joining. And
I'm very blessed that you're part of our congregation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
And hopefully soon we'll be able to be in Shul one day, very soon, and be able to celebrate together.
We'll hold a kiddish in celebration for this one.
That's right.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and you get called up. And yes, absolutely. We owe you an aliyah. You can't.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for joining. All the best.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
What a talented family. Amazing. They have everything, from the singing to performing. And here we actually have the clip, the video, the advert from Virgin Media that Lily was featured in. We're going to end the show with that today.
And thank you for joining, and it's goodbye from me.
See you next week.